We are back. Giants baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko. I am the co-host. The host is Timmy Haller. How are you, Tim?
Doing good, Ralph. How's everything up north?
Can't complain. We had a little sunshine today, which broke a streak, and we needed the rain, but wow, for crying out loud.
Yeah, it's been wet throughout the whole state for the last, better part of a week, huh? Or over a week.
Now, you're in the real southern part. You're in Palm Springs today.
Yes.
Rain.
And it's been raining here for pretty consistently off and on for the past probably 5 or 6 days.
Wow.
And as long as I can remember having a home down here and living in this area, part of the year anyway, I've never experienced this much rain at one time. But I think that the gods are opening up the heavens, right? Yeah, exactly. And then all evens out. The gods figured in early 2017 they'll let it rain here for a while.
Right. Just for a while.
Yeah.
So, we were talking off air, and we have 2 former Giants with birthdays in the past 2 days. One of them is Kevin Mitchell, and one of them is, I think, one of the most underrated ball players of his time. He played both with the Giants and Dodgers, and I have a good story about him when we get to it. His name is Daryl Thomas, and one of my favorite all-time human beings in the world. But let's start with the more well-known Kevin Mitchell.
Absolutely well-known. He was a star, MVP. With the Giants.
Both with the Mets. San Diego had a year or two where he struggled. And back again with the Giants. He's known for a number of things. One of them is making a one-handed catch the other way without a glove. Very few line drive way back, and he just no time to cross over, and he made a catch barehanded. Good athlete. Played a lot of different positions with the Mets. Was very, very versatile. Even played a little short.
Shortstop and third base. I think he came up initially as a third baseman, if I'm not mistaken.
He did, and the Mets were in a situation where they were very, very strong at third. They had Hojo over there, and Santana was a solid kind of a no-hit shortstop who was just giving him as much as they possibly could, and they would move Mitchell over to short for a number of times, I remember.
Mm-hmm. And then didn't they have a kid, Ralph, by the name of Benny Agbayani, like a Hawaiian kid that played there a little bit at third base during that run Benny Ayala. Oh, I want to say Agbayana. Benny Agbayana was an Italian kid, or a Hawaiian kid that played a little bit of third base, a little bit of left field during that run in the mid-'80s, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was a little later, maybe it was in the 90s. And he was a Hawaiian kid. I remember a Benny Ayala, but it was Benny Agbayani, and I think he was a Hawaiian kid. And you look it up, and
I don't recall him as a Met, but that.
Yeah, but he was, and he was for about 2 or 3 years, and he came up like gangbusters. He just came up tearing the cover off the ball, and then he just sort of faded off. And he got a little bit of recognition because he came in a little bit after Sid Fernandez, who was also Hawaiian. And so it must have been a little earlier. It must have been later, but early 90s when he played. Benny Agbayani was his name.
Okay, I will look that.
Check it out. I will not steer you wrong.
Well, see, what happened to my memory? How, there are names that's a name that would stand out for me normally and doesn't. So let me check that out. The third baseman that I remember with the Mets who was coming up with Mookie Wilson was Hubie Brooks, and he came up and was.
But I thought Hubie actually started out with Montreal, didn't he? And then was traded to the Mets.
From the Mets, and he went to him in '85, so he missed the '86 championship season.
Okay.
But was a Met at heart and pretty good ball player too.
Hey, he could play.
Any specific memories of Kevin Mitchell that you have? Well,
the only thing that I recall about Kevin, of course, is spring training. In Florida when he was at Port St. Lucie. I think that's where the Mets worked out, and we were in Sarasota, so we would play against each other. But our paths never crossed. He became a Giant after, Dad was fired, and he came in with that Roger Craig and Ralph Kiner, not Kiner, who am I thinking? Al Rosen duo. And so Kevin was a part of the Giants after Dad had left, and but I remember how exciting he was. I remember the incredible clubs that they had with Will Clark and Kevin Mitchell and Jeffrey Leonard, Chili Davis. They were strong in the mid to late '80s, and with the change of faces at certain areas, like in the general manager and as management, as manager, everything kind of got, exciting again for the Giants right about that time. And Kevin was a big part of that whole transition.
Absolutely.
And a lot that I remember about Kevin too was that when he was with the Mets, he had that gold tooth, and so when he smiled, his face shined, and he had a great smile. He seemed like a guy that was a lot of fun to be around, but I just never know him. I may have met him on a couple of occasions, but that was the extent of it. But the guy that I remember as well as you, and I have to agree with you 100%, and Daryl Thomas. I mean, what a talented ball player. He could do so many things.
Really nice guy. I was fortunate enough to see and talk to Daryl Thomas right after he managed the first game in organized baseball that two blacks managed against each other. And this was the late 80s, maybe early 90s in Bend, Oregon of the Northwestern League. He and Mel Turner, who later coached with the Phillies. I don't think he had been in the big leagues, but they managed against each other as late as, again, the late 80s. I should have checked the date and didn't. In my head, though, I will always remember Daryl Thomas and going up to him and telling him how it's bittersweet. This shouldn't have come 25 years, 23 years, whatever it was, after Jackie broke the line, and that shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. Mm-hmm. But how cool it was for me to watch that game. Wills and Frank Robinson never managed against each other.
No.
Never had a black to manage against. And this is in organized baseball, not just the majors.
Right.
So,
right.
And he was so gracious and such a nice guy, and I just remember that and will forever. And I posted that it was his birthday on Facebook, and somebody reminded me just what an excellent fielder he was. I mentioned that his versatility, and I respected that about him. He played center field, second base.
A little bit of shortstop. He played third. He even played first base, too. And I think a little bit of left field, if I'm not mistaken. I know when he was with the Giants, I was still relatively young, still early in high school, and I admired him for many reasons. I thought he had a really good arm. He could run real well. He was a switch hitter. You know, he was a catalyst. He'd hit up the top of the lineup, first or second, and he really got things moving for the offense. But, you know, I thought he was a nice guy, and I really enjoyed, you know, when I was young, kind of hanging around him. He sort of befriended me a little bit, and he was always kind and very generous guy. I like him.
Nice. He was the guy I have to remind you once in a while, you may not remember that I was the tops rep in baseball cards back in those days. And I met a lot of minor league players, a lot of minor league coaches, former managers in the big league. Daryl Thomas was one of those guys. When you talked to him, he looked you in the eye.
Yes. And he had very piercing green eyes. So you know, if you've ever met and you talked to Daryl Thomas, you would know the color of his eyes. And they were green.
You know, I don't remember that. But I do remember his gaze was real. He wasn't just placating you. Oh, yeah, nice to see you. He had time to ask you.
Yeah. I'm surprised you don't remember that about Daryl Thomas having green eyes.
I don't. I do remember, I think it was Rita Hayworth who had green eyes. And Betty Davis thighs.
Yes.
Or something like that.
Oh, goodness.
I'm so confused with those celebrities.
Hey, how come you never worked the Midwest League or the Southern League or the Florida State League or the Appalachian League, Ralph? Why did you have to stick it in the...
That's a good question. There was one year when I was needed, something's up, they need me, for the Midwest League. And what a league that is. 18 different teams, 4 different states.
Mm-hmm.
Illinois, Wisconsin, and a couple of others.
Iowa. Let's see if you can remember if you can remember the states in which there are teams in the Midwest League.
One more.
Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, and
time is ticking. Don Pardo may have lovely parting gifts for me, and I'm out of there. Okay, Timmy, take over.
Indiana now, because they've got a couple clubs down there in Indiana. But you had let me take that back. Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana. There you go, right there.
Okay, there you go. That's 4. I didn't remember specifically Indiana. I did remember talking to Joe Pettini, former Giants and Cardinal, who managed in that league the year that I was covering it for Tops.
That must have been Clinton, Iowa.
Yes. And
they had a bandstand out there in right field in Clinton, Iowa. I'll never forget my run through Clinton, Iowa. And they had a bandstand out in right center field, beyond the right center field fence, that I hit on top of the stage. Hit a bomb out there, 440 feet probably one night. It was one of those really, nice, dry evenings in Clinton, Iowa. The wind was blowing out about 10 miles an hour. And I got it up into one of those drafts and poof. But I'll never forget that game because a young man, they had just signed the Giants. My dad was working for the Giants at the time, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
One of the guys he signed, if I'm not mistaken, I could be way off base. I was down there rehabbing a knee that I had blown out, and I was there for probably 6 or 7 weeks. And they had just signed a kid out of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, a shortstop named Matt Williams.
Yeah.
And it was his first game there, and if I'm not mistaken, he either took a hat trick or a golden sombrero, his first pro ball game. He struck out 4 times. I'll never forget that. You know, it was all the hype too. But Clinton, Iowa, Joe Patini. But he was managing there. He was still playing for with the Cardinals at the time, I think. So.
Now we're talking almost 25 years ago.
Well, that was 1985. I think that was in 85. That was 32 years ago this year.
Well,
it just seems like yesterday Matt Williams was crushing balls out of the ballpark. You know, time flies.
Well, younger. I mean, it's so cliche how time goes faster when you get older. Do you feel that? Do you feel that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to be 54 in a month. And I look back at, you know, everything that's happened since I was about 28 years old, and I think it's a blur. And it seems like that period between 19 and 28 was slow motion. You know, real everything. And that's pretty much when I was really playing baseball and doing those kinds of things. And then after that ended, you know, I got involved in business and I was doing other stuff and I just, God, you know, it's just like, it's just gone by so quickly.
Yeah.
And I scratch my head, you know, I just go, my goodness, it's, wow, already I'm 54, I'll be 54 and, you know, I'm young, I'm still young. And, you know, in your eyes, I'm young because you're an old fart.
You know, I forgot for a second. Yeah, I really thank you for reminding me. My mortality is something that goes on the back burner occasionally. I get on, Timmy reminds me, I'll be dead soon.
No, you sound just like George Carlin. You're going to be one of those guys that's throwing F-bombs at 105, Ralph, so I'm not too worried about you.
I really hope
yeah.
so. Who's going to do it without me? Who's going to
I have a feeling I'm going to be wheeling you in and out behind in that one little section of, I call it the Haller section, just all the way up to concourse behind the on-deck circle on the Giants side, where the wheelchairs slide right in. I call it the Haller section because just to the right on the wall by the press box is the Hiller Miller or whatever, Hallelujah Twist lyrics on the wall. And you and I are going to be sitting up there eating peanuts and garlic fries.
I saw Danny Kaye in 5 Easy Pieces or whatever he was in. I did see him at I can't even think of it. Not Madison Square Garden, of course, but I don't know, the big with the Rockettes. Do you remember in New York?
Sure. Oh God.
Big Radio City Music Hall. I saw Danny Kaye when I was a kid. It wasn't 5 Easy Pieces, and it might have been that too, but it was Hans Christian Andersen.
Oh my God, what a great movie that was too. I'll never forget watching that movie. Oh, yeah. What a talent. What a talent.
I saw the movie. It wasn't a Broadway show or anything, and it was just terrific. And he sung that song that you refer to where your dad is mentioned, and it's an immortal song. Ironically loved by both the Giants and the Dodgers of those days because he slapped a little fun at O'Malley. No matter what, O'Malley will always get his gate and all that.
Sure, and even Frank Howard, big Frank Howard. You know, you know, and now here's the thing: his wife wrote that song. Danny Kaye's wife wrote the song. And Danny Kaye performed it. Yeah. Interesting. It's a brilliant, it's a little piece of trivia there for, you know, because, you know, the talent that Danny Kaye had was broad and diverse. I mean, He was a producer. He was a director. He did a lot of different things, choreography, great singer. We know that. He was a composer. But his wife actually wrote that song. She was a huge Dodger fan. And of course, at the time, they were living down in Hollywood or the Los Angeles area. And, the Dodgers gave them heartaches. You know, they just, like any hometown team, what you love, you anguish as well as rejoice with your team. And, the K's were, just like that.
Right.
But they love baseball. He was actually a minority owner one time of the Seattle Mariners, or one of the Seattle teams. It may have been the Pilots at the time. But he was also a minority owner of a Major League Baseball team in Seattle.
I don't remember that, but I did remember when Bob Hope owned the Cleveland Indians, or at least a major part in it. Bing Crosby had a major part ownership of the Pittsburgh Pirates. It was not a majority ownership, but big time. And those celebrities own that. Gene Autry naturally owned.
The A's, the Angels. I mean, at the time the Los Angeles Angels, and then the California Angels.
Right.
So.
And those were some historic days, the Bo Belinsky days.
Oh my goodness! Spring training out at Wrigley Field. Well, they played their games at Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, but spring training in Catalina Island. Cubs went out there too.
Later in Palm Springs, where you're sitting right at this moment.
Exactly. And when we would travel out through here, we would stay at this particular hotel that I'm at tonight for a fundraiser for an LGBT fundraising and awareness event here in Palm Springs. And with my girlfriend, we're doing some PR and et cetera. But here, the Riviera Hotel, it's a renowned hotel in Palm Springs, beautiful place. And I'm sitting in one of the offshoot lobbies talking to you tonight, Ralph.
Kind of nice. You have a little privacy, and I get to share what Palm Springs. My memories of Palm Springs were when the Palm Springs Angels had an A affiliate team in the California League, and they had a bunch of players come through there. The Tim Salmons, the Charlie Finley,
they had a lot of good talent come through the Angels organization. They did.
Edmonds, and there were fun days to cover that team. I remember Palm Springs is so hot in the summer that they have a sprinkler system set up where they don't pump out water, they pump out like mist or this, that, and the other thing to try to cool things down, and it works a little bit, but the heat wins. This is a good time of year to be in Palm Springs. What is the temperature? It must be in the 70s.
Well, I think it reached a high of 72 today. I think the lows are in the high 40s. So it's, and with the moisture and everything, it reminds me a lot of where I grew up in San Mateo right now, which is a little bit uncharacteristic for this part of the country. Obviously, it's a lot drier. It's been quite wet here this winter, as it has been in Northern California. But I think with the moisture, it lowers the temperature, raises humidity, but lowers temperature. But I think our average is about 72 for a high right now in mid-January, and we'll start to see that increase every month until right around end of July, it'll be 180 degrees.
Yeah, right.
And you'll feel like you're on the surface of the sun, and you want to go.
Fry an egg out there.
You could literally fry an egg on a rock out here in the summertime. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, before I get to your dad's experience as general manager a little bit, I just want to say that the general manager of Palm Springs was a fellow by the name, at the time that I covered them, was a fellow by the name of Pete Rickard, who was just a New York guy, Long Island guy, and we hit it off in a big way. He was a former World Series star with the Orioles, and they played against the Mets. We had a lot to talk about there.
He played with the Angels.
Pardon me?
And Pete, he did also play with the Angels. Did he not?
I don't remember him as an Angel.
And he is living down here in the desert as well. I saw him at a luncheon about a year ago where we honored Jim Lefevre. Pete was there.
An infielder with the Dodgers and
right. Switch hitting second baseman.
Right, and managed in the Giant organization for a long time, managed and coached.
And then he became the Mariners manager, and then later he managed the Chicago Cubs.
That I remember. I didn't remember the Mariners. But, yeah, he was a good ball player. But if you can get Pete Rickard as a guest, he's one of the most enjoyable guys. He went from there in those days. He became a pitching coach with the A's for a couple of years after that in the minors with the Modesto A's. And he's one of the guys that I look forward to seeing every year on my trips, and who, like Daryl Thomas, would look you in the eye and smile. And because, life is supposed to be a microcosm of baseball, or baseball a microcosm of life, whichever it is. But that calls for attitude and a happy attitude. Life in baseball, if you have a happy, positive attitude going through it, really makes a big difference. I mean, I know I could speak as a curmudgeon, and it's not easy. It's much easier. I'd like to think if I had a 99 IQ and a lunch bucket and something to look forward to after church on Sunday.
Was it bologna and cheese? What did you have in there? Bratwurst and cheese, or what? I mean, what were you eating?
Well, I don't know what the wife fixed for me today. The little woman is home.
Little liverwurst.
Right. This smells like shit, honey, but I get hungry, so I eat it. That's okay.
I'm stupid happy.
Boss,
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, boss, I know you don't like me, but that's okay. I'm happy to be here and happy to have a job, boss.
I'm so grateful today.
And so grateful, yes, not only to you as the creator, but I'm grateful for trickle-down economy. Look how much it's given me. It's given me some yellow showers this week.
Well, I'm waiting for that check, too, every week or every month to come in from the government. I know my president promised me that, too. So, all of the above. All of the above.
But I'm on Social Security, as my grandmother
Well, now that I look forward to my Social Security, too. I've got a few years before I get that. But, hell, I've worked my ass off for that.
Absolutely.
You better come through with it.
Take it as soon as you possibly can, because once they start giving you the benefits, they can't take them away from you. And try to be in a position where it really doesn't matter if it's Wednesday or Tuesday, the first Wednesday or Tuesday in the month when you get it, or the second. Just have a little bit more so you're not more in the bank somewhere. So when that check comes in, there's no big gap. You didn't miss a meal.
Oh, here's the deal. That's just going to be grocery money for me anyway. I've been fortunate enough too, but that certainly will not. And thank goodness for that. It will not. I don't need to rely on that to sustain me. So, I mean, that's a good thing. I know that there are a lot of people out there that aren't as fortunate or blessed that I've been, but, that the little bit that I'm going to be getting, and thank goodness I am getting some, will help, put food on my table, so right. I'm very grateful for it.
people, when I was a kid working, when I was in my early 20s, and we're going back to 69, 70 when I first got out of the Air Force, and Tim, you never knew I had a work ethic, but I threw 7 years of work back to back, got enough quarters before I decided that, you know what, I can't be doing this full time anymore. It's interfering with my recreational time. And but people were telling me back then that you better watch it. Social Security's not going to be here. It's dying. This, that, and the other thing. Well, it did last, and because those 7 years that I worked, it was making good money, but by today's if you made good money, by today's standard, inflation would have wiped that all out. Well, they took the money that I put in, and at that time, and it kept up with inflation. So, although I have a meager Social Security check based on not working that hard, the years that I worked were pre-inflation years, and it made up for it. It kept up with it in some way, in a formula. It kept up with inflation. So I'm not in some cardboard box out there. Mine would be corrugated because it's... The woman said, "I've got a corrugated box." I said, "Oh my God, the mildew."
But it's insulation too, so you got to take the good with the bad.
That's right. And she couldn't understand that. I remember that just back. I said, "But the good with the bad, you forget." Timmy will tell you. Don't hit me again.
Ralph, earlier this week, and I'm sure you have, we haven't talked since our last show on last Saturday, but I think it was Monday. I got up and I wrote a pretty opinionated Tim Haller thing on Facebook, and I know you read it. I know you did. And it was a little ugly. It was a little bit ugly. It was a little bit...
I try to ignore the ugly parts of life.
Yeah, and it was opinionated and it was ugly. I got a little pissy with the people that were bitching and moaning still that there was a new president coming into office and they were still whining about it. And I said, if you really want to do anything productive, get a broom and a shovel and help clean up the mess the guy that leaving left. And it kind of got under some skin. Of about a half a dozen of my 1,300 friends on Facebook, it got under the skin of a few guys, and they started getting really ugly and attacking me very personally because they took what I wrote to be very personal, and so I bounced off of Facebook. I'm not on Facebook for the last 4 or 5 days, just because I just thought, how ugly can we be? How ugly can we really truly get over this whole thing? Because we've got a lot of other stuff going on in our world, and we're sitting here bitching and moaning about who's been elected president. And if we can't deal with the outcome of it, then we need to really look within ourselves to see what we can do to make things a little bit better. Because the reality of it is whether we like it or not, is Donald Trump is going to be our president. And whether we didn't like it or liked it.
Yes, an insurance policy in pennies.
Yeah.
No way.
And, no. And then the other thing is, there were people that were upset that, Barack Obama became president 8 years ago. Well, you know what? He was our president. 2 terms. He served 2 terms. Before that, Bill Clinton, or George W. Before that, Bill Clinton. On each side of the aisle, there were people that were disgusted with who was in office. Well, I want to ask every one of them if they were so brilliant and so well qualified, why in the fuck aren't they in the presidential? Why aren't they the president of the United States? And why aren't they, living in the White House if they're so brilliant and they think that they know how to run this country? I'm quite really appalled by the mentality of some people and how just ugly they can get. You know, Ralph, one thing that I've learned, and it applies to me, but one thing that I've learned is the more critical I am about other people, the more I'm happy I am with myself in my own life. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the heat off of me or the unpleasantries that are in my life, and I'm taking it out and lashing it out on everybody else just because I'm feeling sorry for myself or I'm angry because my life didn't turn out the way I thought it should. And so I have nothing better to do than to blame and point fingers at those that I think are stupid. And really the bottom line is I'm just angry and pissy, you know, and I think that we would be well better suited if we just realize we've got a lot of energy blowing smoke at people instead of, you know what, I need to put my ego down or aside and work together with others to make this a better place. And just, you know, really simple.
Sounds good to me, but we're at a point where we have never been in my lifetime. We're at a point where we are seriously in danger of regressing in a manner that is so basic to what makes our society better than third world countries, better than Asian countries. We reputedly treat our women better than these other countries and our daughters better. And we're on the verge of going back on Roe versus Wade and putting ourselves in a position where the government is refusing to fund Planned Parenthood.
Well, let me ask you a question. I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with abortion. I don't have a problem with abortion, but why should the government have to finance your abortion? Why should the government be responsible for somebody?
The government would have to raise an unwanted child. And that's 2% of what they do. And let me tell you something, Tim. The government does not, even as it stands now with Planned Parenthood, pre-defunding, does not fund abortions for Planned Parenthood. What they do fund is education, contraceptives beforehand. Nobody at Planned Parenthood wants abortion. It's a last at NARAL. Any of these people don't want abortion. It's a last resort. That's not it. But the cost of taking care of a child as opposed to, and again, you have to think of the difference, and I go back to Mr. Webster, who took the time to write 2 words, baby and fetus. He didn't go see fetus or see baby. It was 2 separate words, and a fetus is a fetus and a baby is a baby. And
Are they both alive? Are they both alive?
Not really. Not as we know.
No.
They haven't been born yet.
Well, then why do they have to abort it if it isn't alive? If it doesn't exist, why is there a procedure to do that?
Well,
if it is not alive, why do we have to kill it?
It is not a baby. It's a fetus. There are a lot of things that are alive.
It's a fetus, but what does fetus mean? Okay, well, Mr. Webster defined fetus. What is the definition of fetus? It's a living organism, Ralph. Okay. It's a living organism. It isn't a dead thing. It isn't non-existent. It isn't real. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to scrape it out from the lining of the uterine wall to kill it.
Wow. Timmy, it's not scraping. You're not killing it.
You are pulling it from its life source, which is the mother. Right? You're pulling it from what is providing it. It's just like a plant or a tree.
And that
if you get a seedling,
right to grow or not grow anything she wants.
Right, but does she also have the free will and choice of whether to spread her legs or not? I know that's pretty harsh, but it's the truth.
Yeah,
because she decided to lay down with somebody with the possibility of getting pregnant.
She might have been.
Now, if she was raped, which is a very small percentage of unwanted pregnancy in this country, she may have been raped, and if that's the case, then I'm all for aborting the child. But if it was a woman who was running around at the bars and got knocked out on a Saturday night, why should I have to be responsible for taking care of her medical needs because of her choices and her decisions? Why is that my responsibility?
To say it and to make it her choices, well, how about a promiscuous man? As in, of course,
same thing. Let me give you a case in point.
Around at the bar, and where does his responsibility?
Okay. Exactly. Okay, so here's case in point. Tim Haller, he knocked up a waitress in Denver, Colorado in 1985. And from that, I had a beautiful daughter. She was born in November of 1986. And I met this gal, her mother. We had sexual relations a couple of times, ill-advised on my part. And what happened was, and instead of, sitting, and we sat down and we discussed what are the possibilities here, what are the plausible end results. One was abortion. We don't believe in that. We didn't do that, thank God. The other was adoption. We didn't do that. The third one was the mother would raise the child physically, but I would help financially. And guess what? She's a 30-year-old beautiful daughter today, and I'm so God grateful that we didn't kill her while she was in the fetus while she was a fetus in her mother. I have a 30-year-old daughter today with 2 grandkids because of those decisions that we made. If I'm going to pay the piper, I got to pay the piper. If I'm going to play around, I've got to be man enough to step up and take care of whatever consequences come from that. And I believe that's what I did.
It's a wonderful thing that you did, and that her situation was absolutely different than what we're talking about. How about a woman that doesn't have the benefit of a responsible human being such as yourself to be, unfortunately...
Well, maybe she needs to have better choices and make better decisions, or instead of going out and trying to get laid by some guy in a bar, find a Mr. Good bar, she buys a toy and watches something at home.
Well, your friend, the mother of your child, and yourself didn't know that you were 2 responsible people when you made some choices.
I was completely irresponsible, and there are a lot of other extenuating circumstances, like, she told me she was on the pill. She lied. She didn't. Her intent was to sue a baseball player. She did. She was successful. But you know what? Through it all, the most important person or part of this equation is that we have a daughter who is a living, breathing, beautiful person. And we got past our own selfish stuff and realized, you know what? Because of our actions and our behavior, we have a responsibility to this baby. And that's, and that's where I stand on this whole...
Where does abortion come into this? Because for one reason or another, your belief system, you never considered abortion. So
no.
How could this be? This isn't what we're talking about. This isn't.
Well, it is, because if I were open-minded or liberal-minded enough to say, yeah, you know what, just go have an abortion, we wouldn't have been blessed with the life that's been given to us through our daughter. So that's really the end of that argument.
Parenthood, perhaps, that had the mother of your child or you had more education about sex at the time, about preventative measures.
Education. Education is so overrated, Ralph. Practicality and academia are 2 different things. I learned about sex by doing it. I didn't go to school to learn how to have sex. And that's another thing that we're ridiculously forlorn about, is this whole educational thing. We're going to fork money out to educate people, and they're going to do it the way they want to anyway. That's a waste of money, and it's just for the last 60 years of the public education system has been a complete failure. And, you know, we need a village to raise the kid, but where are the families that had them? Where are the parents that actually had the kids that made the decision to have these kids to begin with? Why aren't they raising their kids? Because they're smoking methamphetamine, they're hanging down at the bar, and they're screwing every other girl that walks through. There's no morale. There's no moral fiber to this country anymore. And that's a very conservative thing, but let's just start swinging from the branches and do whatever the hell we want, because we don't have any consequences for our behavior. And you know what? That's what we're experiencing right now. And you talk about we're experiencing something that we haven't ever experienced in our administration. Well, that's because everybody's swinging from the branches, doing whatever the hell they want, and then blaming it on everybody else because they don't want to be accountable for their behavior.
Well,
and that's what exactly I think it comes down to for us. I mean, I know you don't agree with me, and I'm not trying to sell you or persuade you or anything else. We just disagree. Because I look at life as being something that can be a little more structured instead of living like we're, you know, a Darwin experiment or a Darwin theory.
Well,
we're human beings we're intellectual human beings.
Societal problems are because kids are being raised in a one-family.
It's a huge issue, right?
Working.
One parent, or by grandparents, or by aunts and uncles, or, you know, who don't have their heart in the deal because.
Part of it is because there's something in this country called the working poor, where somebody in this country gets up every day, and more than one person gets up every day and goes to work for 40 hours. And with their 40-hour work, cannot afford a family, cannot afford to raise a kid.
No, and that they can't, and that's the truth.
And
but they continue to do it because it's what they have. It's the best thing that they've got. And if you're going to reinvent the wheel like that, we can start out.
State, Timmy, because the bosses are making 45 times the CEOs.
Oh yeah, absolutely they are.
More an hour, and the top is getting paid, and.
So where do we take our example from, and where do we learn from? Do we learn from China, or do we learn from Russia? What do we learn from? What other governmental system, economic governmental systems do we learn from? Do we learn from China, where they are so repressed that they don't even have an opportunity?
Our ally is Saudi Arabia, and we are estranged from Russia. Now, you know, things have changed. We were a Russian ally in World War II. And Saudi Arabia is basically a bunch of Arabs with oil that we've had to befriend to keep things going for the oil. So it comes down to we wouldn't be having Saudi Arabia as an ally if it wasn't all about oil and avoiding oil dependency. And if we could have had alternative systems set up, we've been warned. We've been warned about global warming.
We don't even have the intellect to set up any alternative systems, Ralph. If we did, we would have done it 60 years ago. We're just beginning to scratch the surface of different. I hear you, but but enough of the fracking stuff. It's the only you know what? Fossil fuel is still the only viable thing that we have until we develop something differently, and we can manage it or develop it to a point where it becomes functional and not expensive. Then I'm all for it. But in the meantime, we still got to keep everything running. What are we going to do? Just,
you can keep traffic jams down. You can keep things running. If you say, well, you know what?
If.
We got a graveyard. We can't have everybody going to work at the same time. And as a matter of fact, we could have people working from home and telecommuting. We could put them on make public transportation viable, so you could park the cars and park the car on the freeway, and cars are free at the parkway, or whatever, and you don't become oil dependent, and you get on a bicycle and...
Okay, so how long do you think that it takes before all of that lifestyle transformation takes? 2 years or 40?
Well, it depends on where our efforts are manifested. If we want to stay at war with everybody, and we want to polarize the world, and we want to blame...
so are we going to condone other countries for the way they treat their citizens? Are we going to become friends with China or Taiwan or North Korea, even just because we want to kumbaya with them and sit around and smoke a peace pipe because we agree with the way they treat their own people and the way they oppress them? We talk about how shitty we have it here. Well, if we're not so happy with the way it is in our country, well, hey, there's other places that you can go to if you can get there, if you can even come across their borders. And it's not that easy as it is to come over here. That's why everybody's trying to get into our country. Because you know what? Wherever they're coming from, it sucks.
Well, yeah, but you have to accept the fact, for instance, the Syrians, who I have no real love for. They spent the last 45 years blowing poison gas into Israel. So,
sure. I don't have it. And you know what? They're probably the oldest civilization in the world, and they still don't get it.
But the solution, first of all, wouldn't have been for George Bush to muster up a whole bunch of false crap and bomb the hell out of Iraq. And from that, ISIS was formed. We have done everything we can since we started on liberalism, not liberalism, but on imperialism. And it started with the Native Americans, and we've gone from there. We sucked what we could out of slavery. We put American Indians on reservations, and it's gone from there. We're an imperialistic country. We were founded by imperialism and founded by slave owners and imperialists. So I can't be too surprised the way we ended up at all.
Well, I mean, and what you say is accurate and true, but the only country that I know of that isn't imperialistic or slave owners in the history of the world is the United States of America, Canada, and I think that's about it. Because even through history, Europe, all of it, including the British Islands, they all had some sort of imperialistic or dictatorship rule. And the only places that I can come up with at the top of my head, and I'm probably wrong because I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, is probably the United States and Canada.
What do they have in common?
That they haven't been imperialistic or slave owners, with the exception of, the whole slavery thing coming from Africa, sold by African slave owners, black African slave owners, to a hypocritical bunch of people in the southeast coast of the United States.
But the entire region went to war. The entire southern region went to war to keep slavery. Exactly,
they did, which is just so ridiculous and so absurd, but so unhuman, but they did it anyway. And in a very territorial north-south, incredibly bloody battle, the North beat them, okay? And to this day, and maybe you can help explain this on our next show, is that every single African American, it seems like, that lives south of the Dixie whatever line, still votes for Democrats, who are the ones that are oppressing them. And it was not the Republicans and the administration of Abraham Lincoln who freed the slaves. and they are still buying into the bullshit that the Democrats are telling them, and they're continuing. I bet you there's some that are still living on cotton farms down there in shanties because they continued to vote for these liberal progressives down in in the cotton belt, and they think that their life is going to get better. When in the reality of it is, it's the Republicans that wanted to free them from that horrible existence. That's just an obvious thing to me. That's just obvious.
I think at this point, when we say a Democrat or a Republican, the Democrats today are Republicans. The Republicans today, so far removed from what a Republican was when, if we're talking about Lincoln, and I'm not an apologist for the Democrats. We had a president. When there was Hiroshima, it was Harry Truman. When there was Vietnam, there was Kennedy and Johnson to escalate it. We've had hawks as Democrats.
And that's funny because I look at the Democrats today, and I think, it's like you're saying that the Republicans aren't what the Republicans once were. I look at Democrats today, and I look at them as either socialist or even communist. I really do. I think that they're into big government, and they think that everybody should be provided for by the federal government, take care of them. Before you know it, they're going to be backing up the trucks with cheese and bread while we have our little coonskin caps on and our parkas that we've been issued by the government. And I see visions of Soviet Russia.
Since I have the solution, and time is running short, the solution basically to all of our economic problems is that if we taxed organized religion, we would free up enough money. You mentioned the cheese and all that. We would free up enough money to feed the hungry and educate the curious. Now, in terms
what do you think we would do? Do you think we'd actually appropriate that money properly?
About education. I know what you think about education, and one can question it. Who are the teachers? Who are the schools that are teaching nonsense? Who are the schools that are funded by big business, such as Haas School of Law Haas Business School at Cal? The professors are teaching what the big business is hiring them to teach, their dogma, their philosophy.
That's not true at all. The big business is so opposed to higher education because Ralph, let me just put it to you really, really succinctly. There are those that teach.
Why does big business
there are those that
teach all the schools?
They don't. Who told you? Who told you that? How do you think pays for their tuition? Either the kids or the government. Not big business. Who told you that? They're recruiting the kids that they're educating. I get that. But they're not paying for those. They might add a wing on or a library at a very conservative, like a Southern Methodist University where George W. has a library there. They're not contributing money to University of California at Berkeley. That's money's coming from parents and from the federal government. I don't know where you're misinformed on that. They're recruiting the kids that they're educating, these big businesses, but they're not spending a lot of money in terms that I'll tell you where they're spending money on advertising for the Cal Bears football and basketball programs. That's where the money's going. It isn't going into anything that's going towards academia.
Well,
absolutely not.
Who built the Haas Library? Who built the Haas?
Well, like I said, at some universities, you'll have a library that was provided by big business. How do you think Haas made his money?
Well, Haas was Levi's, as a matter of fact.
Okay. Do you think he went to Cal?
Probably.
Do you think he went to school? No. He worked his ass off and made a lot of money and then was able to give the money to a public institution. he didn't rely upon, okay, so what I was going to tell you before we wrap this up is there's those that teach and those that do. There are the doers and there are the teachers. It's important to have people to guide and teach people and instruct them into a place of success or that ultimately that's their goal, whatever you define success as. But education, as important as it is, fundamental education, other education can be highly overrated because what you learn in the actual trenches as opposed to what you learn in a tier of chairs in a hall to learn as a lecture is two different things. You can talk about it all day long, or then you can do it.
You're not going to. If you don't have that education, you're going to be a working bee. There's no.
And what about the stories of the hundreds of thousands of people that started out in the mailroom and then they become president of the company?
By pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, am I correct?
Right. And stop worrying and stop complaining about their situation instead of taking an opportunity to grow and get better instead of blaming everybody else for their situation. It's just a matter of perspective, and that's what we have. We have two different perspectives.
Comes out of high school or college with a debt built on their back for the education that they received. A payback thing with inflated interest rates to keep things going.
Which was established by our great federal government, FASCO. I'm just saying, the federal government laid that out. And they're going to gouge you on interest rates. So go to school, but you're going to pay us for 10 years after you get out. Back for the money we allowed. Federal government both their hands are in the education pie, whether or not you want to see it that way. It's the truth. They're the ones that are financing it, and then they're going to get a profit from it when you pay them back.
Well,
the reason I know this is because
the problem, I still think the only solution is to tax organized religion.
That's a good solution. Sure, okay. Tax them.
So
tax
started.
The Catholic Church. Tax the the Jewish synagogues. Tax and make them refuges. Make them mosques and make their facilities refuges for people that don't have a roof over their head and need a meal in their stomach.
And if you really want to stop, like I said, there's two reasons we are imperialistic. One is the oil or any kind of niceties. It started with spices years ago. Anything that we want to go over and get. And the other, we're heavily influenced by missionaries and by failure of this country to separate church and state.
What's our alternative? We can be like China. We can be like China. We can be like Russia.
Let them pay business taxes on their business, whatever their business is. If they're I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to. You shouldn't be able to pray or this, that, and the other thing. But why at the expense of those?
Right, make them financially accountable, and I'm kind of in agreement, and I kind of agree with you on that. Or they can have separate tax structures, whatever, but they need to give money back to the country that's allowing them to do their practice, their faith.
Because it's winter all over the nation, and I'm on my bandbox in a little town called Alameda, California, where it gets cold enough that if one is homeless and out there, and this, that, and the other thing, before they do anything to justify anything, they need to open their doors, mosques, synagogues, and churches. They need to open their doors to the homeless. Oh,
absolutely.
Do that. What if those?
So we need to feed them and feed them as well.
And feed them as well. There is no
exactly. I am in a 110% agreement with you on that. I really am. And maybe, just maybe, the monies that they're spending on or they're allocating for education, you bring in a group of educators or people that can direct people, life skill counselors, whatever, come in and talk to those people who are getting free housing and meals and teach them how to balance a checkbook, teach them how to pay their rent, pay their bills, and be responsible. Hey, good concept, isn't it?
It is a good concept, but you know what? What made them irresponsible? You think if you're clumping in your mind the homeless in with a whole bunch of irresponsible folks, no, that's your grandfather's homelessness. Today you have well-intended people. You have people who are homeless and working 40 hours. Talk about working poor.
You do, but they need to have some education. Otherwise, it's such a small percentage.
If you take some of the money that the big bosses are making, the parties, the conventions,
the yacht trips, sure,
all the yacht trips, what they're squeezing out of economy, taking loans and refinancing houses. And if you get on the radio, if you're listening to the radio today, they'll have you could have somebody come out to your house and rewrite your mortgage again. Consolidate everything. Don't pay that high interest rate. Consolidate those cards. Refinance.
I agree with you.
In 6 months, because what you're saying is, they don't know how to use a checkbook, and society has forced them. Hey, there's only so much money to go around in a family, and if the jobs that have been replaced that were high-tech union jobs, I blame all of this on Reagan and shutting down the unions and killing off the middle class. The middle class has become bullshit in the eyes of the poor. We don't even have millionaires representing us in Congress anymore. We have billionaires. It was bad enough when millionaires couldn't identify with the working class.
So let me ask you this before this whole transition. Yeah, before this whole transition that we're going through right now in the next 10 days or whatever, or whenever Trump gets sworn in the last 8 years, all of that group of politicians, they're billionaires too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Bernie wanted to change the system, and when Trump wanted to change the system in a different way, but both recognized that the system isn't working.
No, it isn't.
And somewhere, and I'll tell you what they did with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic National Committee, screwing Bernie out of the primaries broke the heart of the Democratic Party.
It was the worst. It could be one of the most pivotal and worst mistakes our country has ever made.
Right,
and you know what? We gotta
mulligan. Let's have a mulligan and do this whole thing over. And if you have Russians hacking into it, and if you have a guy like Trump who could stand up there and make fun of the handicap and can shit all over a family,
he's not the only person that made fun of handicapped people. He isn't.
He's the
but
only
because
person
of his
that ever got elected and I'm quoting George Schieffer, who was CBS.
I know who he is.
For years,
sure.
He was analyzing this election. If anybody had done the two things he did, the standing there with his hands like that, and that should have ended it right there.
And guess what? It didn't. It didn't. It didn't end it.
And it didn't end it when he dished that Muslim family who lost their son fighting for this country. And
we're looking to too many faults in the presidential candidates which were elected by their national parties instead of looking at ourselves. It's really easy to blame.
In the primaries, Hillary Clinton was not elected.
But she wasn't elected by the Democratic National Party?
No, it was stolen from that whole thing came out was bogus. It was absolutely bogus. And I'll tell you something else.
It sounds like you guys have some problems over there in the DNC.
We should be, pardon?
You have some problems over in the DNC.
Absolutely, it was. They should have called for a mulligan. Do this over. This is bullshit.
Yeah, the Republicans, see, they would have never done that.
No.
They just get the biggest boob you could possibly get and shock everybody. It's like Howard Stern running for president, you know.
No, actually.
And guess what? He won.
I'm more afraid, as horrible as it is to have a man like Trump as president. And to me, I think it's horrible from the standpoint of self-image of the country. We don't think as a country.
Well, we don't know yet. We're projecting, you know.
Okay.
I lived 8 years with Barack Obama, and I tell you what, I mean, I know that you were probably a fan or whatever, but he in my vision, for me, in my things, he sucked. He had no foreign policy.
Israel. He made a deal with Monsanto. It was horrible.
He made a deal with Iran.
On all the time. He had the most incompetent Secretary of State going, fumbles, jumbles, and bungles with the...
So we can go and sit around and blame everybody, but, you know, it's not going to do any good, Ralph. We're wasting a lot of time and effort and oxygen, our own precious breath, on talking about the American political climate. And you know what? I have other things, better things to do. I have a lot of... It is. I have better things to do. Like, I'm doing a fundraiser tonight for the LGBT community. You know, I do work as a minister, and I work with people that are fighting for their lives with drug and alcohol addiction issues. And you know what? I do my thing, and I watch this circus spin around me, and I just scratch my head. I'm so disappointed and in awe, but I can't do anything to save them. I can't do anything to, you know, really I can't. I can only be present, and if they need a point or a direction in which to go, I'll point my finger. But you know what? That's either here nor there. It starts and ends with the individual, not a group, but a person and their thinking and what is going on between their ears. It has nothing to do with anyone else other than the person, the individual. That's where it starts, and that's where it ends. And we can get around in a group and talk and blame other people for our situation. But the bottom line is we have to be accountable and responsible for ourselves individually before anything else. Before anything else. Okay. And I'll look back on my life and I'll think, you know.
Together on two things. Work together to get, to keep Planned Parenthood funded. Because abortion is so small a part of it that kids need educating. Kids, we can't go back.
Why can't we get health education and sexual education in our schools like we used to when we were in high school?
That's very interesting because school boards are afraid of that.
You know what? What a wonderful education system.
You know
we
what
have.
makes them afraid? It makes them afraid. Basically, religious groups are politicizing from the pulpit and saying that's not good. It's not good. Sex ed was not good. If you read Lyons and Pence and these guys, you read their dogma, it's just scary. It
is, and they were burning Jack Kerouac novels in 1952 in the bonfire because nobody wanted to read, On the Road because, it was just so horrific. We need to read On the Road, and we need to teach it to people. Yeah. I love you, Ralph Tyko.
I love you, too. So we're going to do...
What a great baseball show tonight, huh?
Let's work together sometime in some way that if we just make religion accountable and we just tax them. And
I think you have to. Religion is they have to be accountable. Absolutely.
Good. I love stuff, Timmy.
I love talking to you.
Do it in a way we could see our differences and appreciate what they are and appreciate that opinions are like assholes. Everybody has.
Well, I appreciate you, Ralph, and I have rarely in my life been able to meet a man that is so reasonable and rational. Even though we don't think see eye to eye and everything, I just appreciate your goodness and your friendship.
And rational. I know that And with me, it's because I was a Zionist when I was a kid. I was a little kid when Israel was formed, and I have a sense of Zionism. And I realized that you have to look at both sides, and it's a weakness for me, and I have to reprocess it every day, all that stuff. But I think about it. I think about stuff, and I just try to. My goal is to think before talking. So just once in a while, and then talk. Think about what I'm going to say, and then talk, instead of just spewing something out and then having to defend my position and sound like an idiot. I'd like to do more of that in later years. And next week we'll come back. You're going to be at your fantasy camp in Arizona.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Bill Lasky is the leader of that. He's been a guest on the show. Love for him to return. Love for you to get people off the top of my head. Oh, and I had to mention, you mentioned Will Clark coming up right after your dad was gone from the Giants as the general manager. He basically signed Robbie Thompson, signed Will Clark.
Dad did. He signed all those guys, Matt Williams, everybody. He signed that group of guys that really took them into that next level.
Right, and he does not get enough credit in the annals of Giants history. Rosen and Craig with the hum baby and that thing.
Yeah.
But your dad set it up with that terrific farm system, so give him a little credit. And if you see Mike McCormick down there, love to.
We'll get him on the show. We'll get him on the show for sure. I guarantee it.
He was a New York Giant, and I want to talk about those days with him. And I have a question that you weren't able to answer for me. I think both the Dodgers and the Giants in their final days in New York had such booming farm systems, guys coming up, that if they wanted to have called those guys, both teams were looking for a reason to move on one level or another. And your dad was one of them, a young prospect in the New York Giant farm system. I think he was signed as a New York Giant originally. Am I correct?
Well, he signed in 1957 or 58. I'm sorry. So they had just moved to San Francisco.
Okay.
They had just moved, but they were still very New York. Even at their infancy, that first year at Seal Stadium, they were still very New York.
Very, very much so. And those are interesting days. So we have much to talk about in the future, Timmy. Let's keep it going. Get back on Facebook. You didn't cancel your whole account, did you?
No, I didn't. I just got off of there for a few days because I was getting chastised severely.
Okay. Well, get back on, and
I'll be on there. I'll be on there tomorrow, this evening or tomorrow.
You can be chastised, and remember.
I know. I can suck it up, right?
Suck it up, right?
Yeah, I can suck it up. All right. Be good. Give my best to Tally. Tell her I love my soap.
Oh, yeah.
It's the best soap in the business.
Such an artist, and she's such she's glue, and she's so solid. And I'm blessed. I never lose sight of the fact that good, bad, or indifferent, you got to be lucky in this world. That has a lot to do with it. Or at least set yourself up where you can recognize stuff when it comes along, recognize the good stuff, and recognize what to run away from. I'm a lucky man, and
as am I.
Make sure that your mom keeps on keeping on, and
we will.
Again, we've talked about this. I'd love to have her on for a little bit, and it would be wonderful.
All right, my buddy. Have a good week, and we'll talk. Be well.
We will. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everybody out there, keep on keeping on. That's been Tim Haller, Giants Baseball Past, Present, and Future, a comfortably zoned radio network production. I'm Ralph Tyko. Over and out, everybody. Catch you next week.